Hi, it's Nick from the podcast, and I'm here before we start, which can only mean one of two things. Either we're running late, or I've got a Kickstarter running, and you'll be pleased to hear it's the second one. So yeah, my current Kickstarter for The Collected Letters of Courier Z, a collection of stories about a futuristic postwoman who gets dragged into space crime in a desperate bid to make some real money, is up on Kickstarter now. So yeah, if you fancy a look, the link is in the description of this episode, and it should also be plastered all over my social media. Alright, thank you very much. Enjoy the pod.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be getting involved in an internecine struggle for power in feudal Japan with Shogun, and then setting up a high school women's fight club with the purpose of meeting girls in LGBTQ plus comedy Bottoms. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, we'll be releasing this episode, I believe, a couple of days before the return of Doctor Who for the new 15th Doctor era with Ncuti Gatwa. So I thought it was probably a good time to talk about a viewing project I've been doing for the last couple of months. Basically around the 60th anniversary, one of the things I noticed, at least on my Twitter, in terms of Doctor Who discourse, was a bit of chat around sort of critical re-evaluation of the Peter Capaldi era, the 12th Doctor. A lot of, it got a bit, maybe, underappreciated when it was going on due to Moffat fatigue and the fact that it wasn't very showy. But, actually it's quite good, and, people should go back and watch it again and really take it in isolation. And I thought that sounded fun. It was an era I remember broadly enjoying, but I've only seen it once, sort of week by week as it was airing, so I don't really have a clear picture of it in my mind. So I thought, I'm going to spend the first few months of the year going back and rewatching the Peter Capaldi Doctor Who era. So that is what I have more or less done. I have not quite finished. I've got one episode to go, his final Christmas special. But I remember that being a pleasant but fairly lightweight sort of coda to the era. So I'm going to go now, while it's topical, and talk about my Peter Capaldi rewatch, my Capaldathon, because I watched the final two-parter at the end of Series 10 yesterday, and it was quite affecting. I'm feeling it, so I feel like now's the time to talk about it. Yeah, it's good.
So have you reevaluated or come to any new conclusions after watching this for a second time?
Well, yeah, I guess I wasn't the prime audience for a critical reassessment. I was already a bit of a Capaldi defender. I already felt that more or less, especially the last two series of Capaldi, were quite good and quite underappreciated, and people were maybe not giving them a fair shot because they were so sick of Moffat. And yeah, that's still more or less what I think. I think a lot of it, especially the Series 10 stuff, and some of the Series 8 stuff actually, is better than I remember. I think the main thing to like about the Capaldi run, especially in the last couple of series, is the persona he sort of settles into as your sort of wise hippie granddad. It's very, I don't know, it almost feels very, very peaceful, very like he's sort of come to a completion of the Doctor Who story arc. It seems to have come to terms in quite a nice way with who and what he is. I guess maybe because they've made the Doctor quite a try-hard character, especially under like Tennant and Smith. And Peter Capaldi plays it quite chill. Like, you feel like you're looking at an actual person, not a performance a lot of the time, even though obviously it is a great performance by a great actor. And yeah, it feels very final form in some way for the Doctor. It always feels slightly disappointing that they carried on after that. Obviously they did, and the fact that the era after that, which I'm not going to get sidetracked into complaining about too much, was seen as perhaps a little disappointing, is one reason why the re-evaluation of Capaldi has accelerated a bit. Maybe it would have taken a few more years to get to the Peter Capaldi stuff was really good actually stage, if people hadn't been a bit disappointed with the next one.
Yeah, our views on the Chibnall-Whittaker era are well documented on this podcast, so people can go back and listen to that if they want to hear that. But yeah, I really like the Capaldi era as well. And yeah, I feel I probably should rewatch the episodes at some point. I get why there was sort of a cooler reception at the time than I would have liked. Partly, yeah, you said people were a bit fed up with Moffat. I feel there was like just sort of a bit of momentum had gone out of the show, because inevitably it couldn't maintain that peak of popularity it had towards the end of the Tennant era, the beginning of the Matt Smith era, the point when it was like certainly in Britain, like a national discussion, like everyone tuned in, it was appointment TV, it was on lots of people's lips. I just think you can't just maintain that level of popularity for a long period of time. Like Game of Thrones, like its popularity sort of subsided from its height. Shows like Friends, I think by the end weren't probably not as popular as they were. You lose momentum. I guess Doctor Who, because it changes its lead actor and also changes sometimes like tone and plot quite a lot, I guess it leans into people going like, no, it's not the same as it was it? But I just think inevitably like that level of popularity it achieved is not ultimately sustainable. But the plots and the stories of the Capaldi era were really strong, and like, yeah, the acting was great, the writing was pretty good. I especially enjoyed that season. It was pretty much all two-parters. I felt, yeah, all those like double-parters, like some really meaty stories to get into. That was very good.
Yeah, I think that was a good one. That was also, yeah, the first two series, especially, again, the second one you mentioned, the two-parters, did do a lot to really make Clara work as a companion after a slightly shaky introduction in the Lassa Smith era. I think, yeah, coming to her as a character without having maybe got a bit annoyed with her slightly silly storyline in the previous series did give me a bit more appreciation for that character. So I thought the arc in Series 9, where the Doctor and Clara slowly realise that they're kind of bad for each other, does actually work quite well.
Yeah. There's definitely a good use of Clara, who maybe struggled to step out from behind the shadow of Amy Pond with the Matt Smith era. But yeah, there was some good episodes. There was I quite like the Danny Pink stuff. That was her boyfriend in the first season, was it? The fact that he was a soldier, obviously the Doctor, was a soldier in the Time War, and he has a sort of pacifist or anti-war tendencies. And there were some great monologues and ranting arguments about conflict and war from the Doctor, which obviously with Capaldi's gravitas and talent as an actor made for some electric scenes. Yeah,
those scenes are really good. That storyline sort of, I mean, the reason Series 8 doesn't work quite as well as the last two is because there's some slightly weird tonal moments, to be honest, with the Danny Pink relationship and him occasionally being a bit weird and possessive about Clara. But yeah, there's a lot of good individual scenes and good individual episodes. And yeah, the bit at the end where he dies and Clara absolutely loses it is still incredibly good.
Yeah,
I think what you said about it changing tone, I mean, to be honest, that's another big reason why this era kind of flew under the radar a little bit, in that it's quite quiet, it's quite understated, it's quite thoughtful, it's quite... I always want to avoid falling into the trap of describing a series of, like, family-orientated sci-fi as mature for adults, just because they've got a bit less silliness in them. But, yeah, there is a big cut down on sort of the silliness and the showiness and the loudness, and it does slightly feel like it's aimed a bit more at, the adult fan, thus Spaker, a man in his early 40s, rather than the general audience, which probably isn't sustainable, to be honest, because obviously this is the sort of show that cost the BBC a fortune to make, and therefore is kind of required to appeal to a relatively wide audience. And the Capaldi stuff, this sort of quite insular, thoughtful, slow pacing, and this sort of vague contemplation of itself, probably can't go on forever.
I think that's why a lot of the fans really like this era, because it's contemplative, it's thoughtful, there's some great performances, there's some strong writing, there's things like monologues and like bigger arc plots. But yeah, maybe it's not what the mainstream viewer wants. I mean, I think part of the appeal of like Doctor Who was the adventure of the week, so that people could drop in, drop out, pick up the big episodes. Probably one of the reasons why it became so popular. Yeah, and Capaldi, he's got a sort of quiet intensity compared to, especially Tennant, who does it a bit more Blue Peter presenter style. I always thought like Matt Smith was actually quite good at the dark and more intense moments. Similarly, obviously, Christopher Eccleston was great at that, but obviously that's a kind of short sort of spell at the beginning to kind of setting things up before Tennant really ran with the show. But yeah, Matt Smith I thought was good at the sort of more intense moments. So then obviously Capaldi, he's a great actor and he's good at those as well. I think people expected him to do a bit more of a Malcolm Tucker, obviously not the swearing, but kind of like, because Malcolm Tucker's quite a big, angry performance. And, Doctor Who does lend itself to these big performances. And it's interesting, he did actually not only switch gears from the previous Doctors, but also maybe switch gears from what he's most well known for to do something that was a bit more smouldering, quiet, introspective, with that sense of gravitas that, worked well for, Doctors in the past. And it worked well here.
I think if you watch his first series, he is kind of doing the sort of what if Malcolm Tucker was the Doctor thing. Within the restrictions of a PG-rated show, he is a lot more distant and alien and angry and barking at people. And the arc ends up being him kind of slowly softening over the course of that series a little bit. And then obviously between series 8 and 9, there's a big sort of shift into, as I say, the sort of hippie granddad persona that propels him to the end of his run.
Yeah, it's very entertaining. Yeah, and I enjoyed the Bill season. I thought that was good with them trying to wean the Master off evil. With Michelle Gomez playing the Master, which is very good as well. Some extra energy added by having a new companion. He always gives like a slightly new dynamic to the show.
Yeah, no, the Bill stuff was good. The Bill stuff was, after a few years of quite complicated, intricate storylines, the Bill stuff felt very sort of fresh and almost relaxed in a weird way. But also the ending of it the last two-parter with the two masters, again, the bit I've watched most recently, that's really fucking bleak. I'd actually forgotten quite how sad that two-parter is. You know, you remember a lot of the Capaldi stuff and his introspection and his big speeches about being kind, and you kind of remember it as quite an optimistic era, ultimately, but it ends on a bit of a... I mean, they kind of try and soften it a bit at the end, but it's a bit of a bummer, ultimately.
Yeah.
Like ultimately, the Capaldi Doctor, due to his commitment to kindness and redemption and so on, basically gets Bill killed in the name of trying to redeem the Master.
Yeah, which is... I remember it packing a punch at the time, and they introduced the Mondas Cybermen, the original Cybermen from way back in the first Doctor era, and actually came up with a convincing reason why they look like people in sort of canvas costume with some mask stuck on their face, which actually made them, anything more horrific. This halfway house villains in between humans and, fully mechanized Cyberman. There's actually something quite scary about something that's like this sort of like shambling part machine, part person sort of zombie thing that was actually, I remember being quite scary. Again, working well with a limited BBC budget, using a lot of like dark spaces and fleeting glances. Yeah, I mean, it was a good ending.
Yeah, no, it's probably one of the best sort of finales that Moffat did, I think. It was very affecting. At times, as I say, quite hard to watch. I think it's going to be a little rounded off by this Christmas special I've yet to see, but yeah, well, I have seen it obviously a few years ago. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I see why we're reassessing it. It's got a lot to say quite quietly, and it was maybe quite easy to let it bounce off you a bit, watching it week by week, but yeah, taking it in a slightly more concentrated dose, yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there were definitely some episodes that had like a strong like message, like the two-parter with the Zygons. Obviously, there's something to say about refugees and immigration, things like that. As discussed, there was the one about war and the Doctor's relation to soldiers. There was some interesting ones about death. There was a really good one about him stuck in the time loop as well, slowly chiseling his way out of that time prison. So yeah, there was some absolute all-time highlights. In fact, I think that one is it Hellbent? Yeah, Heaven Sent, that's it.
Yeah, Heaven Sent's the one with the time loop. Hellbent's the one after that when he escapes onto Gallifrey. Yeah, Heaven Sent's really good. Like, it's probably Moffat's last like great sort of high concept episode.
I think wasn't there some poll of greatest Doctor Who adventures done by Doctor Who magazine, and it came second or third or something there, beaten by I think Blink and possibly Case of Androzani, which is the classic era one that always comes top of the polls, which is the last one with the Peter Davison Doctor.
It did come pretty high, yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. So that's one of the highlights of the era. That's definitely actually a favourite episode as well.
Yeah, no, as I obviously rewatched that a few weeks ago. That's still great. That's impressively riveting for an episode that is like extra length, nearly an hour long, and is just Peter Capaldi running around a castle entirely on his own.
Yeah, it was the classic thing with like to save budget, they always do the episode that doesn't have the Doctor in it or like hardly at all, and the episode that has like a lot of Doctor and no companion, so they can be filmed at the same time, thus reducing shoot days and things like that to save money. And also, some of those creatively constrained episodes lead to some of the absolute most interesting and best Doctor Who episodes. Like, that one we just mentioned, Hellbent. There's the Blink episode. There's the one on Midnight when the Doctor's just stuck in the little crawler with the weird monster outside. Turn left. Sometimes the old BBC constraint leads to something interesting going on.
Yeah, no, that one was great. I think obviously having an actor as good as Capaldi kind of helps, but yeah, he pulled it off well in a way that again looks effortless but almost definitely isn't. So yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun.
Definitely something to get you in the mood for Doctor Who coming roaring back into national consciousness. Now we've got a young, slightly Blue Peter presenter-esque new Doctor, new companion. Harsh.
Yeah,
I like Blue Peter, or at least I did when I was a kid.
I mean, I think it's going to be very different to the Capaldi stuff I've just watched. I think Russell T Davies is very conscious of the need to go big and go poppy and not be too slow and ponderous and introspective. So I don't think it's going to be very akin to the Capaldi era, but I'm very interested to see what he does. Or obviously Moffat is back for an episode in this series, so the voice will still be in there.
Yeah, I mean, Russell T Davies does big emotion well. That's his thing. And why, I guess especially David Tennant's performance suited the kind of big, broad emotions that Russell T Davies likes to paint with. And Moffat doesn't do those big emotional moments as much, which is why, Capaldi, I think, suited, or the way Capaldi played the Doctor suited how Moffat wrote. I think Ncuti Gatwa's performance, based on what we've seen so far from the Christmas special and the 60th special, will suit that kind of big, emotional strokes that Davies likes to use. And I think also it's the sort of thing that like the public are more likely to connect with, which might lead to more popularity. There's also the fuckload of Disney money going into promotion and effects and guest stars will probably help as well.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where we'll be in 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time with post-Disney Doctor Who, but yeah, for now, just hope that the new series is good. And yes, we'll get back to you about that in 3 or 4 episodes, I guess, once we've watched it all. For now, Alistair, what have you done in the last 2 weeks?
Well, there's something else that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, actually, which is a sort of slightly unusual thing that I've been watching, which is a series of YouTube videos. But this is a YouTube horror project. It's one of the rare sort of like fictional things you find on YouTube. That's because YouTube seems to be filled with a lot of factual content and vlogging. Nothing against that.
Well known for its 100% factual content. No misinformation whatsoever.
No, exactly, yeah. The legitimate truth. Well, stuff that's presented as factual. Or non-fiction, shall we say. Well, fictional, non-fiction. We're getting tied in a knot here. Yeah, I've been watching, there's a great short filmmaker who runs a channel called Kane Pixels, and he's done these series of horror short films, digging into this internet trend called the back rooms. I don't know if you've heard about this, which is this sort of liminal space kind of horror things. A lot of these videos are kind of found footage type things when people have glitched out of reality, or no-clipped, I think, to borrow a gaming phrase, into sort of strange liminal spaces, usually like made up of like empty office blocks, malls, swimming pools, that sort of thing. Yeah, and a lot of these videos are people wandering through these like weird spaces. And this guy's taken sort of this premise to make a sort of series of horror short films that I've been really, really enjoying. He did a series called The Backrooms, which is a series of interlinked short films exploring this idea that went quite viral, and now he's doing a film about that for A24. But he's also done a new series of short films kind of exploring this concept as well, called The Oldest View. And I really recommend people go and check out these. Yeah, it's a sort of series of found footage, short films exploring this idea, but it is something really, really like gripping and sometimes really quite scary about these videos, and very creepy. So I'd recommend you digging up The Oldest View if you're interested in that sort of thing.
So, are you able to tell us anything about what it's about, or would that spoil the scares?
I can give you sort of a brief kind of overview, which is, the plot is mainly about this guy who's, you don't really find out much about him. He's a sort of amateur filmmaker. He's been hiking, and then he's found this weird like hole in the ground in the sort of the woods, and he goes to explore what's down it and finds it leads to this staircase that just goes down, down, down right into the bowels of the earth. And when he gets to the bottom, there's a abandoned mall down there. And the plot is mainly him exploring this mall and trying to work out, like, what is this place and why is it here and why is it buried? Yeah, and then it gets creepier and creepier as it goes along. I'll probably say not too much about what happens at that point, because that might be getting. But it is kind of so this guy sort of exploring this abandoned mall. But there's quite a few of these backroom videos on YouTube, and a lot of them sort of have this, basically people wander through a sort of weird, eerie, empty space till eventually a monster jumps out at them. And what I like about the Kane Pixels one is that it's not quite that straightforward. And I say it's not just basically quiet, bang, which a lot of horror does. We've discussed horror on the podcast.
A bit of horror microfiction for you there.
Yeah, exactly. I hope that wasn't too scary for the listeners. We talked about horror stuff that basically they go through kind of the two phrases: the creepy, what's going on, and then the kind of switch to basically like in your face, pants shitting jump scares or whatever. And some of the best horror projects, some of the best horror films, like Don't Look Now is probably my favorite horror movie. That's really, really good. And it kind of maintains that sense of tension for as long as possible before trying to like just basically, make you jump out of your skin. And what I like about Kane Pixels, is the same thing I really like about a film, say like Don't Look Now, which is that he just maintains the tension and the creepiness, and it can get quite intensely scary, but without that kind of really obvious kind of something just like creepy just jumps out of you and tries to just a quick jump scare. It's like there's a real subtlety to how the guy works.
Okay, so we're into sort of, I want to say post Blair Witch. If I'm aware that Blair Witch is quite old at this point, and that's not, we've probably moved a few steps beyond that influence.
There's a strong influence of the Blair Witch here, this using the whole found footage horror thing. That genre pretty much wouldn't exist, certainly without Blair Witch or something similar having happened. And so and it is that similar thing of like people exploring a strange space. You've got this video, so you don't know what happens to the person. So there's definitely those kind of vibes in it. And similar to like the Blair Witch is that it gives it that vein of realism that you could believe this is like a weird tape that's been found. It's more believable, even though it's kind of really strange that this is like bizarre mall buried like really deep in the earth that's completely empty. But yeah, it's got that believability to it.
So is it using the YouTube format at all? Is there like a comment and subscribe vibe, or is it just the idea that these are like mysterious tapes that have been uploaded onto YouTube?
It doesn't quite do comment and subscribe, but it's definitely riffing on the YouTube format in that, yeah, I guess it's like this guy's channel is about exploring. And there are lots of YouTubers who do these like exploring. I mean, a whole separate YouTube subculture I've sort of stumbled into are people exploring abandoned buildings is an interesting sort of subgenre of YouTube, especially like people who exploring things in like the former Soviet Union and like Eastern Europe. There's all these like gigantic like leisure centers and stuff, or like party complexes that were built and have just been left to rot, and there's all sorts of videos about people breaking into them and like exploring these bizarre empty buildings. So it's kind of riffing on that, this kind of urban explorer YouTuber, which is done in a similar sort of thing, like kind of handheld first person, someone walking around going, wow, what's in this room, wow, what's this like. So yeah, he's definitely riffing on like a sort of genre of YouTube. The interesting thing to say is that with both this project, The Oldest View, and the previous one, The Back Rooms, so there are these other videos that I kind of put in between the exploring ones that are really quite sort of abstract and weird. They have this sort of, they kind of enhance the story by like adding it to a different dimension, but they're kind of quite strange, and it sort of adds to the kind of strangeness of it all. Yeah, so the guy's good at building atmosphere. Kind of, they fill in the story a bit. In the original one, The Back Rooms, some of them are like kind of these weird corporate training videos that are interspersed between the kind of the videos of people exploring these abandoned spaces. So yeah, I guess there's a sort of very strange vibe to it. Yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to describe, but it's not all just people wandering around through abandoned spaces. There is this kind of like other element to it, this sort of slightly strange supernatural thing going on with these weird abstract videos.
Okay, yeah, I can see the appeal. I can certainly see the appeal to you, yeah. Mentioned abandoned buildings in Eastern Europe a few times, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's definitely ticking a lot of my boxes, I think so that. So yeah, I'm not sure how long this project, The Oldest View, is going to be. I think the original Backrooms one ran to about 9 videos. Some of them are only like 1 or 2 minutes, some of the more abstract ones, and some of them are like an hour long, which are one of the more detailed investigations of these abandoned buildings. But if you're interested in liminal space and sort of creepy horror, what it really reminds me of, which is, this is not an original opinion, this is one I saw someone on YouTube saying, is a book that was very popular when I was at uni called The House of Leaves, which also had this sort of same vibe about these people, they buy a house and they find a weird door in it that leads to this sort of strange space. So it's kind of got that kind of vibe. If you enjoyed The House of Leaves, which is also something that was also good at creating this sort of creepy atmosphere thing going on.
Yeah, sounds good. So it's presumably the idea is similar to his previous series you mentioned, but it's going to probably build some sort of conclusion or have some sort of ending.
Yeah, you can kind of see a sort of like narrative arc like evolving in a sort of slightly abstract way. Certainly, now I think he's done about 5 in this Oldest View. I don't know how long the project's going to be or where it's going or even what the release schedule is. It's one of those things, it's kind of weird how they just come out when they come out. Sometimes you get like a 2-minute abstract thing that's just like some woodworking being done. And it's like, will this relate to it later? Sometimes you get like an hour long, a horror short film or something like that. So it's kind of weird, like how, it's just sort of, he does what he likes. They're all made in the Blender, the animation software as well. So it's crazy how like accurately he's managed to animate this underground complex that looks completely believable. Yeah, it's a sort of very random internet thing that seems to skew the kind of algorithm-driven internet content to just do what he likes.
Yeah, no, it does sound very old-school internet in an otherwise quite sort of look-at-my-slick content world.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not created like, for like the sort of regular release schedules that the algorithm likes, or kind of with highly optimized title cards and titles like YouTube internet, content is sort of released when you like. I mean, just calling something The Oldest View, it's like, what is that? It's like, it creates mystery, not sort of like clickable content. And it's like old school internet content. It seems to have spread largely, although it is online, through word of mouth, peer-to-peer, people telling people like, watch this is great, like I am right now. So, it's definitely like old school internet weirdness.
Nice, sounds good. Considering how much time we spend recommending things that stink a bit of large franchises, it's good to see us finding something a bit niche. Yeah,
I'm interested what happens, if it does come out, this horror movie he's doing for A24. Though I don't know what state that's in. I think heavily delayed due to last year's strike. But if that comes out, certainly something we'd want to cover in the podcast. But yeah, after this episode's out, I'll tweet some links to some videos. So if you're following us on Twitter, yeah, I'll stick out some jumping on points with Kane Pixels. Yeah, fill your boots.
Yes, and if I'm feeling particularly organised, I might even manage to put a link into the blog post on the website. Who knows? Okay, and first main review up today, it's Shogun, the sleeper hit historical drama miniseries that has been airing over the last few months. This is about John Blackthorne, an English pilot who ends up washing up in the, at that point, mostly undiscovered world of Japan, and finds himself sucked into the political conflict between Lord Toranaga and the other lords who want him exiled and dead. And this in turn turns into a wider conflict over who might get to become the next shogun or emperor of Japan. And yes, it's both a wider political drama and a character saga covering the relationships between Blackthorne, Toranaga, and Mariko, who is the woman assigned to translate for Blackthorne. And yes, we have seen all 10 episodes of this. This has been, at least from my limited perspective, a fairly out-of-nowhere smash hit in the first few months of this year. Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this show. Really, really got into it. I might even go as far as to say it's the best show I've seen this year. Although, yeah, only finished it recently, so it needs to sit for a bit. But what I really liked about it is just like how tense it gets. There's a real ramping up of tension throughout the season. You know, the first couple of episodes I start and it's like, yeah, this is good, tense drama. There's a man in a sort of dangerous world trying to find his way, you know, meeting alliances. There's quite a lot of characters. There's a lot of tension. You know, they're building up to a big conflict. But yeah, by the time you hit like about episode 7 out of the 10 episodes, like episode 7 just has these just incredibly tense, gripping final scene, and then episode 8 more so, 9 more so, this real kind of like escalation of tension. And it's kind of hard to describe just how intense the drama gets. Just kind of watch this just to see the tension build and get to this point of like where it's just kind of completely captivating. And also how you get sucked into the world, and it is quite an alien world, like feudal Japan. Like it's very different to like not only to the world we know, but most of the stories that I consume don't really kind of focus so much on this culture. But you get sucked into the ways of doing things and like how it works, and like fully immersed, and you know, you kind of follow Blackthorne through this process, which is really, really engaging as well. So I can strongly recommend this.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. I think there was a sort of a learning curve for me as well, or a period where I was sort of watching it thinking, yeah, this is interesting, to being completely involved in. I think it was about 2 or 3 episodes for me. I think the period where the 3 main characters I mentioned, sort of Toranaga, Blackthorne, and Mariko, come together and start interacting as a group or in pairs. I think it's somewhere around sort of late episode 2, episode 3 is about when the show clicked into place for me. I was like, okay, fine, I get this now. I see the key character dynamics. And yeah, at that point it becomes really, really engaging. Like the stuff with Blackthorne trying to make his way in Japanese culture is, they're really good, and it's impressively really good as well. But it doesn't just become patronising, it doesn't get too white savoury, it doesn't just become Blackthorne staggering around going, look at these weird alien people, but there is this sort of weird sense of him trying and failing to understand the culture and slowly sort of getting the hang of it, and this sort of sense of what it means to shame yourself and what the consequences of that are. And it's very good. It's a very slow build, but yeah, as Alistair said, by the time the drama hits the fan around episode sort of 7 onwards, you're surprised how fully invested you are.
Yeah, I think they've learnt a lot from previous outsider comes in stories. You know, old films like Dances with Wolves, or, you know, there was one with Tom Cruise from about 25 years ago called The Last Samurai, which was, you know, again, like white guy rocks up in Japan, becomes best samurai. And this, like, they're not doing that. I mean, it's the sort of thing that like Avatar gets criticized for like riffing on these films. You know, that's the James Cameron Avatar. But in this, it is more, rather than some guy going into this world and becoming like the best or the most dominant force in it, you are seeing the world of feudal Japan kind of through his eyes. It's not like he's in every scene and there's loads and loads of scenes about the Japanese characters that are removed from him, them just talking in Japanese, but you're kind of following him as you get acclimatized, partly because at the beginning the show throws lots of characters and lots of situations at you, lots of plot threads, as most shows do at the beginning. And it is an unusual world, and you're not sure what the dynamics are, which is exactly the position that the main character's in. He's arrived in this world, doesn't know what the dynamics are, doesn't know what's going on, doesn't know who the important people are. And over time, he gets immersed into the world as you kind of unpick the threads and weave them together into the plot. And that's also illustrated by how he gets better at learning Japanese, becomes more conversant. His clothing style changes. You know, he starts to wear the local clothes. He adapts to like various things, like even simple things like sitting on the floor, eating with chopsticks, preferring their food. You can kind of see the character get assimilated as we, as viewers, kind of get lost in the world, and it all starts to make sense to us. And I thought that was very well done.
And also, it's handled quite, I don't know, realistically, I guess, in that this guy, he is, trying to acclimatise himself and trying to fit in and act in a way that will make these people appreciate him and help him, but not in a way where he becomes the most awesome at everything. By the end of the series, I think this is the end of everything. I don't think they're going to make any more, because this is just an adaptation of a novel. He's still just sort of speaking slightly broken, stuttering Japanese in like one or two word segments and sort of just trying to do simple tasks. And in some ways, him just accepting that is probably his main arc.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But also he finds a place in their society. It's interesting, I wonder if they do more. I mean, this could be the beginning of something longer. I don't know if there's a series of novels. It is based on a novel.
I did look that up. It's part of a 6-book series called The Asian Saga, I think, by the same author, James Clavell. But the books are set quite far apart. Like, the book after this is the earliest one. The next book is set like 200 plus years after it, and the most recent books go up as far as like World War II. So there's not a direct character-based sequel.
Right, I see, yeah. So they're probably telling the story of Japan and its relationship to the outside world. I mean, they could just do a direct sequel with the surviving characters, and they're building up to like there's lots of things that aren't resolved. There's wider conflicts. But yeah, and this has been popular.
I feel like the fact that they didn't, do a big historical drama, massive battle scene at the end is kind of the appeal, to be honest. I think the fact that it ended as it lived through this series of sort of mostly quite quiet character moments and very, very rarely giving you sort of massive payoff action scenes was quite fitting, really. I feel like we shouldn't spoil the ending, but there's one of the final big scenes is between Toranaga and a comparatively minor, often slightly stupid character, and it's surprisingly effective and surprisingly works quite well to hammer home the plot of the show and what's likely to happen in the future. And yeah, it works very well, and I'm happy with the ending.
Yeah. No, I thought it was a good ending as well. Yeah, I did wonder, is this going to be a show that builds to like a big epic battle again, similar to the first season of Game of Thrones, or something like that. But it always went off in an interesting, unusual direction. I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's so tense, is that the plot always seems to shoot off in an unexpected direction. Similar to Game of Thrones, in fact, that like you think you know where it's going, and then something that's been set up will come to fruition, but actually drive the plot in a different direction, and that would always get you by surprise, keep you on your toes, which is what always kept it like exciting and like why you're always hungry for the next episode.
Well, yeah, but a bit like what I said about the Capaldi Doctor Who, except not really that much like it. It's not relying as much as Game of Thrones did on, really throwing the actor charisma and the quips at you. It's a very slow, thoughtful show, which is mostly focusing on, getting you into the characters and establishing the world and the tone. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are jokes, there are some impressively funny moments in most of the episodes, but it's not relying on the sort of quip to keep you coming back.
Yeah, it's more of a slowly building the tension. But then once something comes to a head, the tension gets very, very intense. It's partly because it's been slowly built up and you've been immersed in the world and understand how things work and the significance of minor things in order to create that tension. I mean, like I say, it's a very strict world of feudal Japan when people's status and showing respect is very important. There's like a really tense scene in like the first episode when a character literally puts a foot out of line, and that leads to some horrible consequences for that character because he disrespected some of the lords. It's one of those sort of like almost like stereotypes about Japanese culture, that the kind of the honor system and the sense of patronage and your sort of social standing, how important those things were, but they were really important. And once it's kind of explained to you and you see the characters and you study it for a while, then you kind of understand it. And it's not through any like heavy bit of exposition, even though you have a character who's outside the system, a character who, is fresh to it, the audience is seeing through those eyes. There isn't a moment when he's given a big info dump about this is why honor is important and this is how the system of social face and patronages work. You just have to like pick it up as you go. But once you get to the point, you realize things like how you get to these lots of like scenes on meetings discussing war rather than war itself, but how small things people say have huge impact. The sort of way people are dressed, the really important of disrespecting someone, how people do use sometimes a public disrespect as a political weapon. Once you're immersed in that world, you can really get to grips with that sort of thing and really feel the tension coming from these scenes that don't have like explosive people screaming and like throwing stuff at them, but like there's this real tension from coming to understand the social system of this place.
Yeah, by the end you become weirdly immersed in it, the politicking and everything. I must admit there were some sets of characters I got to grips with better than others. I occasionally struggled to remember who was which faction among the people like back at Osaka, as we didn't spend as much time with them as the ones in Toranaga's camp. That might just be my tiny brain failing me.
Well, yeah, they weren't as well developed. I mean, there were the different groups there, and there is quite a lot of characters here. You get the sense that this is like a book's worth of characters with lots of different plot lines. But I think the show made the right decision, which is to focus on the core 3 characters you outlined and their relationships, because that gives you characters to cling to and you kind of see the world through their eyes and you understand their relationships and I become very invested in those characters. Really wanted to see them succeed and see the world through them. So that was very effective.
Yeah, even though Blackthorn did sound distractingly like Boris Johnson, he did work for me as a protagonist.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just what always seems to happen when you put a British person into a cast of people without British accents. Their accent always ends up sounding comically stupid.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know, I guess he's doing a kind of big British Shakespearean performance. But he's quite a sort of this character who is given to these emotional outbursts and shouting and stuff, which works well in the Japanese social system that's based on respect and honour and face. Having this guy who comes in and just like yells and shouts at people and stuff, is a bit of a contrast, which works quite well. Further highlights how he's different to everyone else. And also over time, he starts by yelling at people, and by the end, he's again having like kind of realised he can get more with the right words spoken the right way. Yeah,
as you say, the development of the 3 main characters is definitely the main appeal, I think, which is why I think having the show mostly just stay quite quiet for most of its run works. Which obviously you'll see, there are some good scenes of violence and action every so often. Some quite grim depictions of seppuku, which do have more impact for how spread out they are.
Yeah, there are some quite bloody scenes as well, which, it really gets across how grim that is. And some bits that come as surprises. There's some, surprise attacks, like assassination attempts in the night, a few gunshots and explosion scenes. There's definitely some times when I've, again, sort of jumped and gone properly like, that got me by surprise.
Yeah, it's a weird showing, but it's quite quiet and slow, and sometimes I have to be in the right mood for it, but it is very good.
Yeah, and it captures a really interesting period in history when Japan was this closed society and like foreigners weren't really allowed in. There's a lot of stuff about how only Portuguese merchants were allowed in, and I quite like how Blackthorn as the English character, he's opposed to the Portuguese as papists, and in some ways he prefers, in the early days, prefers the Japanese because at least they're not papists. And it does kind of make a lot of hay out of things that were incredibly important at the time, the division between Catholics and Protestants and things like that, and which is one of those things that like now it very much looks like the tyranny of small differences, but they do sell you on this belief at the time that the guy, it's really important to the guy, he's a Protestant, and that and that Catholics are like corrupting Christianity and things like that, and that they don't have the best interests of Japan at heart. And they kind of there's like a bit when he like early on breaks the cross of like a Catholic priest, and he's he gets across how sort of shocking and like that is. And it's an interesting period because we discussed in this podcast the Martin Scorsese film Silence, which is about Portuguese Catholic priests in Japan around the same sort of time. So there is other stories, kind of about this period, and it is, very interesting. Not one you see so much on screen, so I enjoyed seeing that.
Yeah, the religious stuff, there's quite a lot of it in the early episodes, in a way that makes me almost think it's going to be a bigger deal towards the end, but they do sort of hover around the priests looking suspicious. Yeah,
again, I don't know if there's going to be more, or there's like, I'm sure that obviously become an important thing in the wider arc. If these novels are set across hundreds of years, then Japan's relation to the outside world, I guess an important theme, with kind of the Portuguese priests and traders being a crucial part of that. But they're kind of weaved into the world, and it's all sort of, it's part of this whole kind of complex world they built up, and they kind of get to, as you get to know it as it goes along. And by the end you're just totally immersed in it and totally addicted to the drama.
So I think we've had a what is the next Game of Thrones chat a couple of times over the years, and might be this, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very much in a sort of post-Game of Thrones mould of historical drama. I think one thing I said before when discussing shows like Domina is that Game of Thrones, as well as like changing blockbuster TV and changing like fantasy TV, it's changed, like, historical dramas that are aiming to be realistic and don't have magic or anything like that. In that you can see the influence of like Game of Thrones in the kind of way so the narrative structured and the kind of the world's introduced and multiple plot lines are sort of brought together. All these like, elements again, shows like Domino picking that up, taking that to the historical genre, and now this show's come along doing that. And this one's, one that seems to have succeeded well, captured the public's imagination, and is also very successful. So it's part of that ongoing process of styles and influence running throughout TV.
Yeah, I think it weirdly has the Game of Thrones appeal in that, but I think the sort of idea of exploring an interesting different culture for a lot of viewers maybe maps almost as well between a fantasy world and feudal Japanese culture they're just not that familiar with. It's possibly exciting in a similar way.
Yeah, well, they're both escapist. They're both cultures you don't know anything about. They're both something you can just kind of get lost in, go into this world where you don't know what the deal is, but there's these big stories and big arcs going on, and you can get invested in it as as an entertainment thing to take you away from, I guess, the kind of the familiar day-to-day dramas of your own world.
Yeah, so if your life is riddled with annoying day-to-day drama, then watch Shogun instead and enjoy the honor system and seppuku. Right, okay, and last up today, a little less recent than some of the things we cover, but it's a film we've both sort of wanted to watch for a while, and we had a slot free, so why not? This is Bottoms, a comedy film from about 6 months ago. This features Rachel Sennett and Ayo Edebiri as two gay teenagers in a school in America who are very much the bottom of the social hierarchy, which I believe is one of the meanings of the name, and have decided to try and meet women and impress people by, obviously, starting a girls-only fight club at their school where teenage girls just beat the shit out of each other. It's very silly, it's very fun. Alistair, you've seen it, what did you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was very funny, like a really sort of silly, over-the-top film. It's got this sort of weird, like, almost like cartoon energy to it, in that all the characters are quite manic and run around like sort of shouting and doing ridiculous things, and there's like also like kind of really no consequences to anyone's actions. There's like emotional consequences between like the characters. There's like falling outs and stuff, and there's love plots and things like that, but like there seems to be no like social real world consequences. Like at one point they build a bomb and blow up someone's car, which is probably one of the funniest bits of the show. And it's not like a sort of like a homemade pipe bomb type thing. It's like a proper like sophisticated like bomb with like a digital timer on it and things like that, which someone's just kind of pretty much produced out of thin air. And I get the feeling, so it's not particularly realistic. And all the characters are kind of silly and over the top, but it is just very, very funny. So if you're looking for something to have a good laugh, I thought this met the brief very well.
Yeah, no, this is very anarchic. It's very ludicrous. It's tonally all over the place, but in an incredibly good way. There's a little bit of I don't know, I've watched so many comedy dramas in the last few years, but it's honestly quite pleasant when I do get to watch a pure comedy that is just trying to be silly with only the vaguest of hand waves towards emotional truth. You do kind of care about the characters, but not in a I'm gonna cry way, just in a sort of, it's vaguely nice for these underdogs, a triumphing, I guess, even though I think they may have killed some people to achieve it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I got invested in the characters. I thought, it's not exactly an original setup. There's two loser kids at high school. They want to meet girls. They come up with a crazy scheme to do it. It turns out to be bizarrely successful, but then backfires. There's a falling out. There's some obstacles are put in their way. There's a low point. Then they all come together at the end to have a happy ending, which is, I know it's not exactly a spoiler, but you kind of knew how it was going to end from the beginning. It's not really breaking new grounds in originality. What does make it different is that it's an LGBTQ plus comedy. It's about two women at high school who want to meet other women, but it does kind of does that sort of that kind of familiar plot slightly differently and tells a lot of good jokes on the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm blowing any minds to say there's a pretty heavy angle of parody satire to this film. Like, the amount of bits where I was watching it thinking that is definitely a broad reference to a cliche for things that happen in these sort of films. Yeah, as you say, it's exactly the sort of plot you get with usually a sort of a level of subversion of the two characters do the thing, they start the fight club, they become popular almost by accident. They realise that becoming popular has kind of turned them into monsters, and then they proceed to solve this by differently acting like monsters. It's just incredibly stupid.
And I think a lot of it's sold on the charisma of the two leads, who are I think, really, really great in this film. Yeah, the main character sort of is played by Rachel Sennott, who was in a great film called Shiva Baby, which is another, like, LGBTQ plus comedy. It's, probably aimed to be more realistic, but it's very funny. So if you enjoyed this and thought she was funny in that, I highly recommend going watching Shiva Baby, because that's a very funny film. And obviously, Ayo Edebiri, we discussed before in The Bear. She's great in that. I think, everyone loves The Bear. But in that, she plays like sort of intense and angry, and this playing silly really shows her range.
Yeah, this definitely is not another part like The Bear. This is, as I sort of said, The Bear is, I guess, another one of those comedy dramas I've mentioned where there is a lot of humour, but it's quite low-key humour and it's mostly in service of drama, whereas this, the jokes are just in service of jokes. Any moments of drama are fairly light and incidental. And Ayo Edebiri is very good. She's, as you might be able to tell from the comparison between this role and her role in The Bear, she's, in classic American style, somewhat old to play a teenager, but I think the fact that the teenagers are being played by people in their mid to late 20s is part of the joke at this point, as one of the many things they're satirising.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the character that Rachel Sennott plays in Shiva Baby is like a college student, and that she's probably more likely the appropriate age for playing college students. But it's an American high school film or TV show. They play fast and loose with the age. I mean, half the cast of Glee look like they're in their mid-30s.
Well, Glee took it vaguely seriously. This, I think, it's just meant to be silly. In some ways, they're kind of in as you say, a sort of cartoon version of a high school movie. Yeah,
and there's also lots of characters that are like alluding to various stereotypes. It's quite a big cast outside the main characters in that, there's everyone in the Fight Club kind of. Each character has like distinct identity in their sort of little moments. I think partly because everyone's so manic and running around yelling things means you can kind of fire sort of quick bursts of characterizations because someone just like screams something. That is basically the essence of their character. But there's different characters. One who looks like they're on meth, who's sort of supposed to be from a trailer park. There's a black Republican. Yeah, and there's the popular girls, the sort of A-list girls from the school who are the ones that the two main characters have their eye on. The whole point of this is to try and get their attention.
Yeah, and the two sort of football player jock characters who are not so much just sort of thick-headed jocks, but I think they're maybe cyborgs. They're just inhumanly stupid and can barely seem to even walk down the corridor.
Yeah, but they're not the sort of like, bully jocks that, are sort of like terrifying in the way that a lot of high school bullies.
No, they are too dumb to manage that.
They are just very, very stupid. And for some reason, the entire school seems to be obsessed with them. And there's like just pictures of them everywhere.
Well, again, the joke is that they're mortally obsessed and worshipping of these people who, to be honest, one or two of them especially, I don't think could even go to the toilet by themselves.
Yeah. I like the joke how there's all the posters in the cafe about how one of them can't have pineapple. Which is just, again, it's like really, really silly just to make sure there was no pineapple. Yeah, there's like lots of little moments like that. These kind of like makes you think like, we're definitely not in the real world with this. We're definitely in some kind of bizarre cartoon version of high school.
The steady escalation of it all is just, how, in some ways, that's kind of what you're watching for. How much further can it go? How much sillier can it get? I mean, throughout the film, there's this constant operatic fear of the upcoming massive football showdown between them and their long-term rivals. And because everyone is certain that at that game someone's going to be murdered, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, and it's certainly, when it gets to the finale, delivers by upping the ante of the silliness and the craziness. So it successfully continues to increase the jokes and the madness to the end is like the big payoff of it all, which sometimes with these, and we definitely said this on the podcast in the past, that can be where things are let down in that, they set up a dynamic and they kind of build on it and then they don't pay it off with like a big epic finale. But this successfully does.
Well, yeah, as I say, it's just the sense of escalating silliness. Like, as you say, they go from slapping each other in a gym to blowing up a car to having this ridiculous fight to the death at the end. It never, like, crosses the line into becoming an action movie. It just becomes more and more cartoonish and stupid.
Yeah.
I don't know. The film has an empowering message, I guess. Although it is pretty constantly making fun of things that have empowering messages. It's that films about gay characters can still be incredibly silly or gross without needing to, pause for an empowering message.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And, it's dealing with, modern feminist issues about, inclusivity and trying to empower women, but also making fun of the fact that some of the people trying to do this are inherently ridiculous. Or at least these characters are. It's kind of almost like bizarrely a bit like Citizen Smith, is that I feel this comes from a genuine feminist place of being like, it's important to empower women, that women feel safe and can protect themselves in a world of male violence. But also some of the characters trying to do this are just ridiculous people who are just inherently funny. It's kind of, it kind of walks that line quite well. So yeah, even though there's bits that are kind of mocking female empowerment, I feel it comes from like a positive place. You know, it's not like kind of anti-feminist sniping about female empowerment. It's more about saying that it's important, but also that finding ways to make jokes and fun out of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the scale for what constitutes silly is so broad on this film, but yes, you know, the awful men are played as ridiculous dummies, and a lot of the women are also ridiculous dummies. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person, you're just ridiculous.
Yeah, in a world of everyone's kind of an over-the-top, silly cartoon character. Even like the principal seems to be sort of some unhinged, angry man. There's a tutor character who's just, again, a massive idiot and just sort of sets them the stupidest assignments possible while he reads like a nudie magazine in class and things like that. So yeah, everyone is just like ridiculous, basically.
Yeah, I mean, does it feel a bit, I don't know, shonky at times? Maybe, but honestly, it has this sort of anarchic charm where that's kind of part of the appeal.
Yeah, I mean, on some levels, obviously, it's a lightweight film. It's not to be taken seriously. I enjoyed it a lot. Is it the sort of thing that will the memory stick or will it fade? That remains to be seen. And it sort of shoots through things so quickly. Some, if you sat down and analysed the plot or the sort of the way people jump from being so low down the social spectrum, people won't even look at them, to suddenly being in with the popular girls. These sort of things don't necessarily hang together under detailed inspection, but that's not really the point or kind of charm of the film. And also, it's a tight 90 minutes, funny, gets in, gets out. The flaws that it's picked up are just the necessary flaws of just telling this like silly, quick story that is just sort of, fun to watch, and that's kind of all it's there to do. So it does that, and that's kind of the end of it.
Yeah, but I've seen this described online in places as the world's first big successful like Gen Z comedy, and obviously as an aging millennial who is basically at this point a dusty skeleton, I don't know if I'm qualified to judge at this point, but I do think it has the sort of manic hyper-referencing that you kind of associate with that, and also a not completely insincere approach to, as I say, sort of empowering messages and moralising, but a belief that those things aren't, necessarily good in themselves, and those things deserve to be mocked as well. This film is definitely somewhat against a certain level of, Instagram pleasantries, and is somewhat believing that we can, go low and be gross again.
Yeah, based on my understanding of Gen Z humour and culture, again, mainly gleaned from YouTube, the place where I interact with young people, because I don't know any. Really.
Okay.
But in a passive consumer way, it just gets worse. Just digging the hole. Down I go. It's all on the hot mic. Great. Yeah, there's got various elements of, I feel like, Gen Z humour in that it's got this sort of slight edge of weirdness and sort of strangeness to it. They're kind of very much looping back to that strangeness of like internet humour, things done for the lols, not to be taken seriously. It's got that kind of meta-modernist element of having both big ideas that are serious and important, like, women's safety and like male violence, but also kind of having this kind of postmodern deconstruction, like, also we're not taking it seriously at the same time. So it's got that kind of both together, both the sincerity and the kind of lack of sincerity at the same time, which is, in some ways the most sort of, beard-scratchingly interesting thing about the film.
Well, yeah, it's gone from, the important thing is we can talk seriously and very po-facedly, that's a word, about our issues in a lot of millennial-friendly media, and we've all had a good cry at a show with a strong message about mental health in our time, or at least those of my generation, to a certain level of, as I say, time to be silly again. And fair enough, it's a good time. Is it mocking me? Who knows, but I liked it.
Yeah. Are we supposed to be the teacher who just doesn't care about anything anymore, has become largely superfluous?
Yeah. As an upstanding member of society who probably used to say nice, supportive things, but now that a single woman has betrayed him, has gone straight down the Meninist K-Hole. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably the millennial character.
That's who we are, yep.
All right, cool. Good stuff.
Please keep listening to our podcast.
He's got another character, yeah. Next week, X-Men. Back to 90s millennial nostalgia.
Yeah, we're a cliche of a cliche. Never mind.
But yeah, watch this film, it's funny.
Yeah, that too. We're cool. 6 months after it came out.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please like and subscribe in your podcatcher of choice so you never miss an episode. And also while you're there, leave us a review so that more people can find out about the show. If you want more from us, you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And please follow us on social media. We are Moderate Fantasy Violence I think we should be searchable under that name on Blue Sky, Facebook and Twitter. Please pay no attention to the sound of my neighbour occasionally hammering next door. And also, please follow me on social media at NickMB on Twitter, Nick Bryan on Blue Sky, nickbryan.com on Instagram, and Nick Bryan searchable on many apps, where I will mostly be tweeting, posting, rambling about my current comics Kickstarter, which is running now. This is, of course, The Collected Letters of Courier Z, a collection of short comic stories by me and a range of exciting artists I've not worked with before, in which we reveal the crime-riddled life of Courier Z, a postwoman who also does dodgy jobs on the side to pay her bills. It's a bit sort of 2000 AD Judge Dredd, it's a bit Red Dwarfy in terms of sort of people doing crap jobs in the future, and it's a bit, to bring it up again, it's a bit Doctor Who-y as she goes to a sort of different high-concept world in every story. So yeah, if you like comics and if any of that sounds appealing, give it a look. You'll be able to find the link many times on my social media feed, probably a few times on the MFV feed, and I'll put a link in the post for this podcast as well. Thank you.
Yes, and I've seen some of the artwork on Nick's Instagram and Twitter, and I say it looks beautiful. And yeah, I've been really enjoyed Nick's writing in the past, so I can highly recommend you all get out there and support this Kickstarter. After you've done that, if you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky by searching for Alistair Ball. You can also get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or you can get my theatre reviews by visiting Everything Theatre. And you can also get more from us here in 2 weeks' time with another episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will be, as discussed, engaging in our millennial nostalgia by watching X-Men 97, the continuation of the 90s X-Men animated cartoon series. And we will also be exploring a radioactive post-apocalyptic wasteland in the Amazon Prime TV adaptation of the video game Fallout. Join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of all that. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.
Quick toilet break and then for bottoms.
Sounds lovely.
Right. Cool. Glad that's all recorded.